The year was 1991. In a moment that stunned the world, the Soviet Union, once a global superpower, collapsed almost overnight, sending shockwaves through every corner of the vast country. For millions, it was the end of an era they had known all their lives. On December 25th, the red flag was lowered over the Kremlin for the last time, a powerful symbol marking the end of 70 years of Soviet rule. The world watched as a new chapter in Russian history began. The old system of guaranteed jobs, free healthcare, and state support vanished almost instantly. Factories that had operated for decades stood silent, government offices emptied, and millions faced unemployment for the first time. The Russian Federation emerged, but its future was uncertain and untested. In the streets, hope mingled with anxiety. Dreams of Western-style democracy and prosperity filled the air, as people read foreign newspapers and gathered at rallies. Yet the path forward was uncharted and no one knew what tomorrow would bring. The entire economy had to be rebuilt from scratch. Factories, farms, and homes once owned by the state were suddenly up for grabs, sold off in chaotic privatization auctions. For many, it was a bewildering scramble to adapt to a new reality. President Boris Yeltsin and his team, desperate for solutions, turned to Western advisors. They embraced shock therapy, a rapid, painful leap into capitalism, hoping it would bring prosperity even as it risked social upheaval. The transition was chaotic and disorienting. Prices soared out of control, savings evaporated overnight, and supermarket shelves emptied as hyperinflation took hold. The rules of daily life changed in an instant, leaving many feeling lost. People who had been respected engineers, teachers, or doctors suddenly found their skills devalued. Many were forced to take odd jobs or leave their professions entirely, their futures clouded by uncertainty and fear. On the streets, new kiosks sprang up selling Western goods, Coca-Cola, Levi's jeans, electronics, symbols of change and possibility. But beneath the surface, anxiety and confusion ran deep, as people struggled to make sense of their new world. The collapse was not just economic, it was psychological. Russia was no longer a superpower but a nation adrift, struggling to find its identity and purpose in a rapidly changing world. The promise of freedom was real, and for some, exhilarating. But for many, it was overshadowed by the fear of the unknown, as families gathered around televisions, anxiously watching the news and debating what the future might hold. Russia stood at the edge of a new, turbulent era. The old certainties were gone, and the future was more uncertain than ever before, a nation searching for its place in a world that had changed overnight. Shock therapy hit Russia with a force few could have imagined. Overnight, price controls vanished, and the familiar rhythms of daily life were upended. Ordinary people woke up to a world where the cost of bread, milk, and basic goods changed not just by the week, but by the hour. Hyperinflation soared to an astonishing 2,500% in 1992, wiping out the value of the ruble almost overnight. Money lost its meaning, and the savings of a lifetime evaporated in a matter of weeks. Life savings became worthless. For many, a lifetime of hard work could barely buy a loaf of bread. Families who had once felt secure now faced hunger and uncertainty. The dream of a prosperous market economy quickly turned into a nightmare of survival. People lined up for hours, hoping to find food or basic necessities as shelves remained empty and hope faded. Then came privatization. Every citizen received a voucher, supposedly a share of the nation's wealth, a ticket to a new future. The government promised that these slips of paper would make everyone a stakeholder in Russia's new economy. But most, desperate for cash to buy food or pay rent, sold their vouchers for next to nothing. Few understood what they were giving up, or how these vouchers would soon be worth fortunes in the hands of a select few. A new class of winners and losers emerged almost overnight. The majority, pensioners, workers, scientists, lost everything they had built. Factories closed, and the promise of a better life slipped away. Poverty spread like wildfire. Professionals who once held respected positions became street vendors or taxi drivers, doing whatever they could to survive in a world turned upside down. The social safety net that had protected generations was gone. State support vanished, and families were left to fend for themselves, often with no idea where to turn for help. Amid the chaos, a new breed of entrepreneurs, quick, ruthless, and well-connected, rose to power. They navigated the confusion with skill, seizing opportunities that others could barely comprehend. These were the future oligarchs, accumulating vast wealth while millions suffered. Their fortunes grew as the rest of the country struggled to survive. The gap between rich and poor widened dramatically, shattering the egalitarian ideals of the Soviet past. Russia became a land of stark contrasts, luxury and desperation side by side. The social cost was immense, leaving deep scars on the national psyche. Protests erupted and a sense of betrayal settled over the population. Russia's transformation was brutal, and the pain was felt by nearly everyone. The struggle to adapt, to survive, and to find hope in a new world would define a generation. Privatization in the mid-90s, especially the controversial loans for shares scheme, handed Russia's crown jewels, its most valuable state assets, to a handful of well-connected insiders. Factories, oil fields, and entire industries changed hands for a fraction of their worth, often in secretive, hastily arranged auctions. The process, meant to jumpstart a market economy, instead concentrated unimaginable wealth and power in the hands of a select few. Former minor officials and businessmen became billionaires almost overnight, seizing control of Russia's oil, gas, and metals. Their sudden rise was marked by displays of opulence, private jets, luxury cars, and sprawling mansions, unimaginable just a few years earlier. The oligarchs wielded enormous influence, not just in business but in politics and media. They owned newspapers and TV stations, shaping public opinion and ensuring Boris Yeltsin's re-election in 1996, often through aggressive campaigns and backroom deals. For many ordinary Russians, this was a profound betrayal. Communist rule had been replaced by the rule of a wealthy, untouchable few. The gap between rich and poor widened dramatically, fueling resentment and a sense of injustice. Corruption became endemic, infecting every level of society. The wild 90s saw fortunes made and lost overnight as laws were bent or ignored, and criminality flourished alongside new money. The economic system was dangerously unstable, built on debt, speculation, and short-term gains rather than sustainable growth. Markets swung wildly and uncertainty became the norm. In 1998, a perfect storm hit. Falling oil prices, the Asian financial crisis, and mounting government debt triggered a catastrophic collapse. Russia defaulted on its debt, the ruble crashed overnight, and banks closed their doors, leaving millions unable to access their savings. The nascent middle class was wiped out, and poverty returned with a vengeance. Families struggled to afford basic necessities, and hope for a better future faded. The crisis exposed deep flaws in the economic model and left Russians distrustful of both capitalism and democracy, questioning the very foundations of the new Russia. The yearning for order and stability grew stronger as chaos and uncertainty dominated daily life. Out of this turmoil, a new leader emerged, Vladimir Putin, promising to restore stability and rebuild a shattered nation. Vladimir Putin came to power as Russia reeled from chaos. He promised order and pride, and oil prices soared just in time. Petrodollars flooded in, paying off debts and stabilizing the economy. The state could finally pay pensions and salaries, bringing security to millions. Russia's GDP grew rapidly and a new middle class emerged, eager for consumer goods and travel. Shopping malls and prosperity replaced the bleakness of the 90s. The new social contract was clear: stay out of politics, and the Kremlin would deliver stability. Putin reined in the oligarchs, making their fortunes dependent on loyalty. Strategic sectors, especially energy, returned to state control. The Kremlin's power was consolidated, and resource wealth served the state. Stability was achieved, but at the cost of political freedom and economic diversity. Russia's recovery was real, but its foundation was narrow. The boom years masked deep problems. Russia's economy became ever more dependent on oil and gas. High prices brought prosperity but discouraged real reform and diversification. Corruption persisted, now more centralized and systematic. State-owned corporations dominated, often prioritizing politics over profit. Genuine competition and innovation were stifled and honest entrepreneurs struggled. Much of the wealth left the country, hidden in offshore accounts. The legal system offered little protection for property rights, deterring investment. The chance to build a modern, resilient economy was missed. Russia continued to import high-tech goods while exporting raw materials. The impressive facade of prosperity hit a fragile, outdated economic engine. The reckoning was delayed, not avoided. In 2014, Russia's annexation of Crimea triggered Western sanctions and a sharp break with the global economy. Sanctions hit hard, targeting banks, energy, and defense, while oil prices collapsed. The ruble lost half its value, inflation soared, and real incomes fell. The era of rising living standards ended abruptly, and the social contract began to fray. The Kremlin pushed import substitution, boosting domestic agriculture but struggling in technology and industry. Shelves filled with Russian goods, but quality and variety suffered. Economic growth flatlined, investment dried up, and brain drain accelerated. The economy survived, but stagnated, more isolated, less dynamic. Many young professionals left, seeking better opportunities abroad. Russia adapted, but the adaptation was grim. The country was surviving, not thriving. The 2022 invasion of Ukraine unleashed an economic war. Western sanctions were harsher than ever. Major banks were cut off from SWIFT, reserves frozen, and Western companies fled. The ruble plummeted, inflation soared, and fears of collapse spread. The Kremlin responded with capital controls, high interest rates and forced currency conversions. Emergency measures and high energy prices averted disaster. The economy shifted to a wartime footing, pouring resources into military production. GDP rebounded, but growth was driven by military spending, not real prosperity. Civilian sectors suffered from labor shortages and lack of investment. High inflation eroded wages and Western brands disappeared. Brain drain intensified as skilled workers left. By 2025, the economy showed signs of strain, overheating, unsustainable growth, and a weak civilian sector. The fortress held, but cracks were showing. Russia's economic survival came at a steep cost. Cut off from the west, Russia pivoted to the east. China and India became its main economic partners. Energy exports were rerouted, with China and India absorbing over half of Russian oil. Trade with China exploded, filling the void left by Western goods. Chinese cars, electronics, and machinery replaced European and American brands. New payment systems bypassed Western sanctions, but dependence on China deepened. Russia became the junior partner, supplying raw materials in exchange for finished goods. This dynamic risked turning Russia into a resource appendage of China. Chinese banks remained cautious, wary of U.S. secondary sanctions. Turkey emerged as a key intermediary for trade and finance. Russia used shadow fleets and creative schemes to keep exports flowing. Adaptation kept the economy afloat, but at the cost of transparency and independence. By July 2025, Russia's economy stands at a crossroads, resilient yet deeply vulnerable. Wartime stimulus and Asian trade have kept it afloat, but civilian sectors are decaying. The Kremlin projects strength, but the long-term outlook is perilous. The economy is unbalanced, addicted to military spending and reliant on China. New threats of harsher Western sanctions could trigger a fiscal crisis. Deep structural problems, corruption, lack of innovation, and brain drain remain unresolved. High interest rates choke private sector recovery. Russia is winning the short-term survival battle, but losing the long-term war for modernization. Its future depends on political choices, continued confrontation, or a new path. The journey that began in 1991 is far from over, and Russia's final destination remains